Is that Will?
No.
No, who is that? Oh, and Tony Johnson.
It's Antoine.
Antoine Johnson from New Orleans originally, but then he became Tony as he worked, as he had literal jobs with bosses and rent to pay and things like that. Then he became not Antoine wouldn't do. So he's Antoine to us. Right?
Yeah.
We know that he's got Antoine in him. Even though to the world he's Anthony. Increasingly Anthony. To us, he is Antoine who is doing Anthony. So then I say, is there ever able to have actually, because as soon as there's an Anthony, a bill comes with your name on it, all of a sudden you become Anthony completely. Or if okay, so you see that once you stick your nose out the door, you're Anthony. But you also understand that somehow you've navigated a life where Antoine was more reflective of not a literal you. But if you were making movies of you would be Antoine. If you were making music, you would be Antoine. If you were earning a living, you would be Anthony. So let's say someone whispers in your ear before you start out on the journey, all the faces you can take up to navigate the different circumstances you're in and still preserving an essential you. So let's say that person who loved you or knew you knew all the names that you operated under. And they can hear when you were Antoine, and they can hear when you were Tony, and they can hear when you were Anthony. So supposedly in intimacy, that is shared, the variables of identity. Now, can one ever say, given the available expressions for you, would you like to try Anthony Johnson? You're asking Anthony Johnson, would he like to do Anthony Johnson? Or is there, not as if Anthony Johnson is written into the script like a prison of such, but a kind of a reflection that you are doing Anthony Johnson, except that it becomes literally a reality when you're in it. But from my perspective, you're assuming that reality. And from something that we share, there's a feeling in you. And somehow it can't be, when it's violated, when the feeling is lost and the literal situation becomes the reality. When the literal situation becomes a reality, then its concern is always around its survival. And it means continuity survival. It doesn't mean creatively survival, like something precious is remembered or, okay. So you see that in fact within a person, there are many so-called existences taking place. But where it's coming from is usually obscured. So then it's literalized as coming from an historical imperative, and this and that. That was written into the script hormonally, structurally, by parents, by attitude, by upbringing. That there is a continuum going on in the being. And the being is just secondary to this continuum. So that's what a tribe would say, that the individual is a happening. It's like a piece of corn on a cob. Seen from the perspective of being, you have glimpses of the act of the 100 acts a day you may need for different situations. the awareness of that somehow shifts the plane from it being survival. But it's also not to, again, what Catherine saying, wishful thinking about the literal bill paying and the world as it comes to you in your face. But I would say that if I was outside of the circumstance, we'll presume a godlike energy would want to know what it is to have fear. Because from the space, you don't see what is manufacturing fear. But you do see that as you enter into different structures or situations, there is what you would call not fear, but something that allows you to prep or investigate or look at something, not so much get rid of. So let's say from the creative perspective, when there is a fear felt, there's also an intuition attached to that fear. But it's usually a conversation with our being that we avoid. And that it has created zillion-dollar industries of avoidance of a conversation with what appears to be living and dying simultaneously. And that we know from all religions and all structures and all science that living and dying, in fact, is happening with anything in form. And that there is a conversation on different levels. You then discover the conversation in your own being. So I was kidding around and saying I got the vaccination because it was also given at the same time for a few of us. And Mary then can be the medium again, where I can just make believe that it's naive or whatever and get the shot and just say hello and tell jokes or whatever. But then when I got home, my immune system said, you traitor bastard, you threw away all your spirituality. You're supposed to, you know what you just did to me? You just threw away 30 years of balancing that I've been doing for this whole story. I'm going to quit this job. My immune system threatened to quit because I got the vaccine. And I said, yeah, but it was Pfizer and it was with Mary and we were goofing. And I said, come on, you're supposed to be a spiritual guy. And spiritual didn't mean getting it or not getting it, meaning that I didn't consult my immune system. I'm talking shit about the immune system, but I've never said, hey, baby, how are you? Is there really an immune system? Okay. Without theorizing it, and I'm going to help it or not help it. Can you meet it? And then you start to see a whole management in your body and in your being. And how all of this is interrelated in a way that you perceive. And you see that you are one amongst many voices within your being. And if you're wrong, it'll give you a pain somewhere in your body, on your back. I saw a box out there for, I think, of dog food for Brenda, dog. And I picked it up, but I misjudged its weight on a flat surface there. And I felt this tang throughout my body, on my back, you know. But then when I lifted it, it wasn't that heavy, but in the angle I was in. So it's almost, I'm in mathematics and angles and this and that. So all the activity is a kind of form of exercise, but without it literally being exercise towards a goal. And I say, if in fact you were given the script of Anthony Johnson, who can be Antoine at times, would you take the role?
Oh, I often resist the role. You know, we often lay down with dogs and we find ourselves with fleas at the same time.
I understand the tricks of navigating the form, but this is not the form. This is here. And this is having a perception of your situation from here. So from here is kind of Meshuggah. You can be anything, and sure, anything can happen or whatever. You could have any conversation. You could have, but what you can see is how, without it becoming so psychological, how much the status quo is dependent on looking the other way. And so then you see that in looking the other way, which is the nature of the social fabric actually that we're in, that one has to suppress so much in order to navigate a continuum. And once the relationship becomes a thing, then the thing needs to survive. So it then sacrifices all its creative juices towards the literal survival. That it becomes a very dumb joke that I heard, which is that this couple then goes to a sex counselor, psychiatrist, and the counselor then takes the wife on the desk and starts making love to her. And he says to the guy, "You have to do this 3 times a week." And the guy says, "I can't afford to come here 3 times a week." So then we kind of understand that we're in a weird psychic zone where you're kind of being counseled about what you don't want to do, as if it's a flaw, when in fact the love may have fallen away. Where in fact the creative elements of the situation is not as a flaw, but as a part of natural living and dying and situations, and that at times it's requiring a, "Hey baby, do you want to do this thing anymore, or should we try this thing?" Or coming like so that people are on the same page, not because we're kind of surrendering to the psyche, because we're recognizing this is happening anyway. And so there are events that look like future events, but are in fact seated in the present. But you also understand, and I was going this way, how deeply attracted the being is to the broken heart, how it will hold on to everything, trying to cure it and knock it out and get rid of it and help it. But that somehow it has a relent. So then I say it's not exactly, let's say the person's life is in fact this creative act seen from a space. And you see that there is a conversation with the mystery in the person, while the person is intent on continuing and connecting. And you see that the person has access to their literal story, not only their historical story, from a perspective of non-ownership. You get a glimpse somehow of what really happened. And you saw that there were elements in you that had attractions in relationship to you. And those attractions then created realities that were bouncing off the attraction. So then you are exposed to dimensions of life, not where knowing is not the as accumulation of information, but knowing is more of a creative act about life, that you are a medium of an experience. And that somehow all the weird elements that composed you and before you and the accidents and everything, when you looked at it from afar, you saw they weren't accidental at all, but they were almost put in line in a grid. When one is exposed to the dimensions of self and yet one returns again to the story, I still think one is a fool for love. And I think the difference is it's by a kind of creative choice. So then the schmuck would say, "Well, why are you in such a weird, goofy?" And he said, "I love her, man." So I got the damn shot with her because we got it together, so I'm doing schmaltzy that way. Because the doer and the donor is so weird. And then when I get to the other guys, the donors become right-wing guys who want to do this, and they're kind of, they're kind of lame. Although there is a truth that runs through it, hipness represented that truth. That somehow if you were hip, you were in it, but you were not of the world. You were moving from a sound that you heard in your head or a feeling that you had or a situation, but that somehow your life had become a creative process. So somehow it escaped being driven by the forms around it, where survival was the main medium. But time and time and time again, you see that one has to surrender to some idea of survival. Even though they're not out in the street, even though they're not hungry, even though they're not this and that, somehow systemic survival becomes the reality, where you imagine, how will I be strung out? How will I be this way and that way? And yet you can see, if you go down the block, the very thing that you fear is happening. And that there's different forms or different expressions for you. But that somehow there's a fear base in the situation. But if you go down out to that neighborhood for a while and hang out, and because we're not far removed from any of it, we need the ability to walk through the whole environment up and down, and we see the thread that runs through it. But we also see that can be a friend in any one of these spaces, and the friendship introduces you into a world. So I used to kid around when we walked through the Puerto Rican neighborhood. It was like a tough thing to walk through the Puerto Rican neighborhood as kids. But if you had a girlfriend, it was an easy thing. And if you had a Puerto Rican girlfriend in the neighborhood, then you could just walk in as bold as you please, and somehow it just gave you a entree into the story. So somehow, sometimes a feeling shared, a friendship, allowed you entree into a story where you're in it, but you're not of it. You were in it because there was an affectionate feeling or love or this or that, and it allowed you to enter into a literal story. Urja, if you you wouldn't want to come back as Urja?
Not necessarily. No, I've done it. Once is enough.
Yeah. So then who would you come back as then? Lauren Bacall.
That's not bad.
That's pretty old though, isn't it? So we'll give you. You feeling okay? So let's say you still have some, let's say we passed away already and we're just hanging out somehow. You found the house with a balcony and but that you wish this experience. You said somehow in your dreams, let me get the virus. Let me get the shot without moving, without doing anything, without fear. Let's see somehow you manage that. Say somehow you manage that. You manage somehow to continue this story that you're in. And I said, how does she do that? And I said, she gives readings. I said, what, are you making up this story? She gives readings? Doesn't she have a job out there in the factory or anything like that? I said, she gives readings. And I say, who's that there?
Catherine.
I was thinking about you, Catherine Ann Jones.
Hi. I'm late. I just got back.
I saw a very weird thing about this poor fellow with, the trials that have been going on all week, or for the last month, actually. But they then had the girlfriend of the man who died.
Floyd?
Yes.
Oh.
And she was a white woman. And she said we would meet and then go. And I said, that woman looks just like Catherine Jones. I said, no, Catherine Jones is an older woman, I understand, and this and that, far removed from it. But there was something in, there was the most ludicrous scenes that she was describing from a woman in her situation, but at the same time, she just loved the guy. You know, and in her storyline, she just loved this guy. And they would meet and they would rendezvous and they would do this or they would do that. They would have, okay. And I said, there's something, Catherine and Ann Jones was the full Ann Jones, Catherine Ann Jones. Was something in the prosecutor speaking to her, you know, that you see flits of things. That's my imagination. Again, with what kind of thinking was it again, Catherine?
Danny, did you hear yesterday there was another killing of a 16-year-old?
Yes, as it.
What's
So
going
you look. Let's say you from your window you hear the echoes from Ventura of gunshots, and you know that that's happening there, and that there's a kind of weird normalcy that somehow that runs through our country, to our places, to our situations, that normalizes, but it rarely happens to you literally. We somehow have still gotten the chances where we've made our own sorrows. The mugger didn't come up and put the gun in your nose and blow it away, or this or that, or the guy beat the crap out of you and left you. So somehow we have found a kind of hurt running through the story in our own remarkable ways, where we haven't been, we've come close. Maybe we've come close. In India, did you come close to there being a physical problem or something like that?
I was mugged twice in New York.
In New York. Well, mugged in New York, you could understand but when you were getting almost killed in India, you didn't understand the metaphor that ran through it. Mugged in New York, you understand the dynamics that are running through the story.
It goes with the territory.
Well, I remember the last time now, even when I was now a human being, not a New Yorker any longer, but you still then have as I was explaining something about the exercises, when I'm throwing the ball up in the air or against the wall outside or whatever, I'm actually doing some exercise. But it comes easy to me because as a kid we played baseball. So you could almost catch the ball with your eyes closed, but it brought up an innate quality that was there. That even hopscotch or something like that, or skipping or something, I remember doing. And then, so it brought up an innate thing like that you were good at then, because somehow it wasn't you doing it, but it was second nature for you to play ball that way as a kid or this, and it came back. So what I'm saying is that future events have an innate parallel circumstance happening where time is also compressed. For us now is one long day, has been one long year, has been one long day, and somehow time is shifted. So our perspectives then in the situation have shifted also. It's like looking at it from the other side of the mirror to some degree, where we understand something of the philosophy, we're in it but not of it. So the historical imperative, we see it play out there. We see all the schematas that run through the society are at play. But somehow something in us has allowed us to be free from the extremes of those survival elements that run through the story. So you can recognize them. But then once you're under threat, where it's personalized, or in your face, then it also literalizes. So I would say that the folks that I'm seeing here, we still have a space between the itness of it. And we get a glimpse as to what we think is happening to the world that we live in. Has it always been happening? There was something in the paper today that said it is so dry out here that it resembles the dryness of the collapse of the Pueblo Indians in the 16th century. That was the last time it was that dry. And they had a wonderful, inside the mountain, they built almost a project, a housing project, but they had to leave in the 16th century when the drought became so hard. And I think they became the Hopi Indians afterwards. So you see, far as nature is concerned, the drought is not literally a drought. It is a happening, and it's a migration of these people. But what they experience is dying, starvation, leaving. So you glimpse forces at play in the everyday. And so you get glimpses of the living and dying perceptively. You know, I read last week that Freud and Jung were cocaine addicts. They were the early experimenters with cocaine.
No, Freud, not
listen,
Jung.
Castro, listen, I have been in rooms where brilliant people are drugged, and their conversation can be remarkable and schmucky simultaneously. You know what I mean? So let's say you won't give that Jung also was free to.
Jung was not, Freud was addicted a bit to cocaine, yes.
Well, they sold a letter, I think, at Christie's that said to a girlfriend of his, "I'm coming in, I'm going to be high on cocaine, so you better be ready for me and not do this little dainty girl stuff." That was the letter supposedly he wrote.
Who wrote?
Freud supposedly wrote some.
Yeah, Freud, yes, yes.
So I'm saying, okay, let's say you zoom into the actual life. It's not demeaning to see that the very things that they were explaining, they were experiencing. And it does seem to be written that way. The desire the capacity to reach to get from the sexual into the sensual is qualitatively different than coming from the sensual that may become sexual. Because the sexual literalizes into a thing that itself seeks to continue. And that was explained to me in the cancer in the bladder, that the very thing that was protecting the bladder then took on a life of its own and tried to leave the bladder through the muscle. And that the cancer, they were explaining to me, was a kind of something that thought that it also had a right to live. So I was kidding around. We were going to call you, Catherine, and say, okay, somehow, through naivete, we got the shots.
Well, you did.
Well,
which one did you get?
We got the Pfizer, three of us at the same time. So that was part of the courtesy. Well, I mean, you were kind of waiting for an invitation or something like that, some schmaltz or whatever. So we were employing wishful thinking, literal thinking, allowed Janet the freedom not to do as she wished. So there was one and the same thing. There was a sort of an agreement, but the way it came at the same time, where you can kid around and it had its own naive sense. So we did that. But then I was also saying when I got home and I was explaining it that way, then my immune system yelled at me and cursed me and said, "You traitor bastard, you're supposed to be a spiritual guy and you ran out and you know what you've done to me?" You think you're talking this logic? You've just laid 20 years of, I've been managing this whole damn system of yours. And now you lay a vaccination on me for the COVID. So I had to kind of give it creds and say, you know, I've been thinking I've been doing all this stuff all along. And then I realized how heavy my body, what it must have gone through, keeping my story together. And so somehow you kind of just see a schmucky thing that's happening, or a mashugana thing that's happening. From a different perspective, not so much that you own the story, but that somehow the life has been a creative act in the schmaltziest weird way, and logic was only an ingredient in it. And when you see, when it came to you personally, logic wasn't that strong a suit. Maybe when you chose something to see, you would employ logic or reason, but sometimes you would employ schmaltzy feelings, wouldn't you? So you see, you have a range of expressions available to you. And somehow, without our knowing it, it's allowed this remarkably weird Catherine Ann Jones to have, how old are you now? 42?
Yeah. Yeah, my birthday same week as yours, so I've added a year.
So, okay, do you want to, you can do sign language if you wish. No?
No, thanks.
I just saw a terrific film we saw the other day, and that was Helen Keller movie.
Miracle Worker.
Miracle Worker. To get this kid to learn to eat from a spoon, there was a 15-minute battle, a literal battle of throwing the chairs at each other, smacking each other, dragging her across the room. But she tried to make the kid have a connection. Have you seen the movie?
Oh, yes.
Ryan?
No, it sounds like
No,
I would like to see it.
It's an old movie.
It's a play. It was a play first.
But to see the movie again, I mean, I've seen it, we've forgotten it, but then we saw it again, and we said we couldn't believe the acting in it with Anne Bancroft and the woman who played the
Patty Duke.
Patty Duke.
right?
Patty
And
Duke.
she played deaf, dumb, and mute,
Wow. Wow.
and
Deaf, dumb, and blind.
blind.
And blind, not
And
mute.
then she was trying to teach her sign language by touching her.
Oh my gosh.
He
And then
wasn't
she was
mute, though.
explaining it to
No.
her where the kid would just take food from everyone's plate and walk around and just do like that. So then she tried to sit her down. She had to wrestle her around the neck. She crawled away. They fought under the table for her to learn how to sit. And then had to put a spoon in her mouth and receive the food. But what a scene. It was, you wouldn't believe the struggle. And it violated all the rules of the time.
Yeah.
Of treating people who are hurt or this or that, but she felt that the child was brilliant, and they were sentencing her to being a fool.
Hmm.
That if she kind of had language or if she kind of had an expression, so it was pretty interesting film to see. It was on TBS or something like that, and
Turner Classics. Yeah.
But the acting, it just floored you. And the woman who was teaching her was semi-blind.
Hmm.
And Bancroft.
Wow.
What
True
do you
story.
say then, Tony? Can one enter into the story? Not as a trick or as better thinking or this or that, but somehow some event reveals something that's been parallel happening all along. But somehow it's an accident because it's not owned by the psyche. So it seems like an accident, but you see how the accidents are written into the literal story. That there is an event waiting. So that becomes show business and wishful thinking and this and that, because the logic of the day is literally, I am who I am. And that's all I am. And as a matter of fact, when I was 16, I got that tattooed on my arm here. It's Popeye. And the line under it, I went into the Navy as a kid. And I was just looking through a book of the pictures of it, I had on the bottom of the Popeye picture, I am what I am, and that's all that I am, written there. What do you say? Catherine Ann Jones, you've lived a few personalities, a few identities.
You know, I went to a psychic many decades ago, and I always remember something she told me. She was a well-known psychic in New York, and I was acting then. I had played in over 50 plays, and she had no idea what I did, but she saw it in my hand or something. And she said, because you've played all these roles, you don't have to come back and live those lives. I always remember, I don't know if it's true or not, but it felt true. You know, like I committed suicide in 3 different plays and all of these things.
The premise of the acting studio had elements like that, of a perceptive thing that allowed you to assume the identity.
Yes.
And those who were the heavy hitters supposedly were able to kind of recreate the history from a mystery, more that somehow they came from a mystery, not so much a literal history. And so they were able to see a thread that ran in the other stories, supposedly. So they were always attempting to do that. And I was just watching Susan Strasberg in a concentration camp, where she played
Capo.
the movie was called Capo, and it's an old black and white movie, and she's in a concentration camp. But Capo meant someone who took advantage of the friendship, like the landlord. In other words, or they were the boss of the factory that you worked in, or something like that. So the workers then informed on you to the boss or whatever. So a capo was the kind of person that told you were getting a shower when they were actually gassing you, and they got 3 months extra life left over. So then Susan Strasberg, is to become that as she enters into the camp. Then she finds a way to become a capo, or a boss of the other woman. And that premise was that you think that she was the least of the person because she had empathy, supposedly, and absence for what was happening to them. But then once you got into the story, you saw the story resembled everyday life with personal actions. People still stole blankets from each other, still informed on each other, still broke each other's hearts, still had love affairs.
I think survival changes the rules.
It certainly speeds it up. It does speed it up, but the question is, because when in fact what you would presume to be really weird becomes the actual structural reality, and somehow you have to suppress everything human about yourself to accommodate the survival element. You are in what I would call a holy shit circumstance, where the day is. So then it would seem that personal relationships would loom large and instantaneous. They wouldn't need so much time as much as a feeling shared, or human feeling. Being in a dehumanizing situation, there is a hunger, just like hunger, or a thirst, just like thirst, for a human exchange. So when you are in that situation, you are kind of managing it somehow. Accepting the kick, or the this or the that, but somehow managing it. So retain some humanity for yourself. Then you read some stories of where, okay, how deeply can you go into the psyche and still retain a literal life? And I say, well, cocaine may be helpful because you really were skirting on some areas. We'll say to Freud, you really are visiting some areas that are hidden from the literal, because they're going to want to give it treatment, not understand it. But there will be some who want to understand a kind of parallel life being lived. that there's a creative life being lived also. And then there's the literal life. And so then you see that the person is not the story that they're in, but they have to find that out. You may visit a family and see that the people are stuck in a story, what appears to be stuck in a story, but is their literal survival or normalcy. But you see then your presence there would not be so much related to the story, but would be a human contact. That's what you're doing with Way of Story, aren't you?
Oh, that was long ago, first book. I had a very unusual email from India. Could I share this with you quickly?
Sure.
Because when you were speaking, I was thinking sometimes fiction becomes fact or
That's what I
becomes
think
literal.
yeah.
I've completed this book of short stories set in India.
Yeah.
And one of my stories was sent. The stories were sent to someone in India I don't know. And she wrote back this amazing thing. I wrote a story called Murder in Assam. I've never been to Assam. It's pure fiction. I just wrote it. She writes back that a friend of hers in Assam, a tea planter, said that in Assam, on the tea plantations, the girls who pick the leaves are often called names of the week because if they're Wednesday and it's Wednesday, it's their day to service the master or the overlord.
Yeah.
And this was just common practice. I did not know that. I wrote this story as a fiction and found out that was weird. This 2 days ago, I got that.
I think this guy Ka, who wrote Ka, would tell you that.
What is that? What is Ka?
Ka is a book, stories of the mind and gods of India.
Oh.
Now, but of course, the other racy ones are by, what's her name again? O'Flaherty, Wendy Doherty, O'Flaherty.
Oh, yeah, she's the Jungian mythologist.
Well, she's banned in India.
Really?
Yeah, she's banned in India because.
Well, I may be too.
Well, to some degree, it's revealed that when the gods were making love, they were supposedly, it was sensuality, not literality. It wasn't towards an end of continuity, but it was more exploratory.
I think it was more metaphor.
When it's organized around the history, it's sexual. When it was around supposedly the mystery, it was sensual. That the sexual is a byproduct of the sensual, not the aim. But in the literal world, the sexual was the aim itself. But then it seemed to me that what they said, what was the mystery then in it? And they said, it's the memory that will come out of the sexual, that will introduce you to the fact that it was sensual. That the sexual captured the moment. But what you see in retrospect is you saw the sensuality running through the story. So you saw then that the body itself had a certain time, that it was demanding babies and it was organized a certain way where you thought you were doing one thing or another, but in fact, you saw in retrospect that your body was part of a system that you were in. And that you see that many of the decisions come out of the system to some degree. And that somehow you had to have a baby. Then you can get on with your story. But first you owed Jesus, Mako, Moses, whatever, you owed him a baby. But then you also understand that your story literalizes, but that somehow you're surviving or expressing yourself as a creative act itself. And it's not to say you don't have a social security number in a literal story, but you assume those identities when needed. If the police knock on the door, then you can be Catherine Ann Jones immediately with a social security number, and that's who you are. But you would understand that you would share in a kind of friendship or feeling the other dimensions of who you are. And you would see, boy, how many dimensions would you like to have, Catherine? Let's say Jesus, Mary, Joseph. Let me see. There is a song to Krishna coming down from the tree. Om Sangsara Piriksha Maruda. Went on for 40 minutes like that. There was also a stream of mantras.
That's when he stole the clothes of the gopis bathing.
And there was a day after they told me, what happens when there's a monkey in your room? And they said, oh, you have to cut his arm off. And I said, okay, we'll see. They said, the only way to deal with them is to cut the arm off, because then the monkey won't come in and the other monkeys won't. I say, okay, yeah, somehow we're meeting Indian lore here. Okay. And they say, how did you find the baby guru? And they said, the baby was abandoned on the Ganges. He says, babies abandoned all the time on the Ganges. They're not really abandoned, they're sent to a better place. And so you see that many of the gurus have adopted babies or asked their own gurus, their dead gurus, can they find a baby, what type, on the banks? And so let's say, and then there's the leper colony before you go over the bridge there, and they're putting their arms out at you or whatever. And but then as you get to meet them and hang out there, you start to see that they're people again. And they're having similar arguments as any families, and who sits where and who does what. And so you're kind of in Schmucksville, that everything that's enchanting turns into the same, as if you're back in Brooklyn again. But you have the experience. But what you do have also in the experience is that none of it fulfills that yearning. That somehow the failure of the experience is not a failure, it's a literal failure in one sense, but it creates, when the life is perceived as a creative life, then failure and success are elements of a similar expression. That the creative act has a kind of, finds a level of creativity in its so-called failure. But it needed, and I say, what was failure? And I said, failure creatively comes close to the broken heart, where it's not explainable that way. You did this, you did that, it did that. You see somehow that the broken heart was written into the story that you were in, and that you worked hard towards it. It's not that you avoided or ducked it or did this or that. You did the best you can to find the broken heart. And to me, the broken heart, without literalizing it, is kind of getting a glimpse of the literal from the mirror's perspective, looking into the story, where it's more of a mystery than a history. Because from the mirror's perspective, looking back into the story and seeing you, it says, what the hell's going on there? Okay. When the person has a history, the mystery looks into the story. I see that there have been, through time, in my mind's eye, partial discoveries of that mystery, history, story going on in the form. But I also see, as one visits a before you, not from the literal history, but from the accidental discovery. It releases the story from literalness. And you see that there was a you before there was a you. There was a you in a desire. There was you in an argument. There was you in a... And although it seems so remarkably abstract and accidental, and all of human history seems really accidental, trying to make a history out of a series of brilliant accidents. you start to see dimensions of a before you in the circumstance that you are in. And so then you see history not as a literally driving force. Once you are exposed, I feel, then it's like writing. It awakens, and once you are writing about something even that you've lived, you start to see dimensions in it that were hidden in plain sight, because there need to be a state of being for you to see it. Because why? I say because you see the literal you is resistant to deeply seeing. So it purports to see in the future by pursuit while it's living in a grand avoidance. So it has a date with an experience. It's not that it finds out anything, it sees, it discovers that it's been avoiding the continuity organized around survival, then employs reason and logic as the premise. But continuity becomes the main form. But when one creatively chooses something where they see that there are other dimensions of you than just surviving, that there's a dreamer and a hoper and a schemer and a this and that, you meet 20 versions of yourself or variants. Then the life is no longer always literally coming from the same place, because somehow you see the survivor element won't allow you to dream. Where you see that dreaming may be as valid an experience as logic. So let's say as your life becomes, you have perspective on your life, you then have a palette creatively open to you, just as if you were visiting different countries, and somehow you navigate what would be very weird to you in order to keep the human element going. But the country would then be a threat to you if it violated completely the human element in your eyes. So somehow, if the feeling, through even in my experience in India, if the feeling falls away for India, then the weirdness of India becomes very, the predominant thing. But we have been able to navigate cultures, structures, amazingly enough. And it becomes normal. But there are also events where you're in it, but you're not of it, because you don't have the historical. I heard that my mother, when she married this Italian boy and she became a Catholic as a kid and ran away from her home, that she then had to have a year of catechism classes and have a communion and confirmation before she could marry him. Jesus, Mary, and Joseph, she had to be pure. And then when he died after a few years, that her father took her back. And then as I research it, I see they've been doing that for 1,000 years. Boy meets girl, they've been into marrying. A white girl like Catherine marries an Indian boy or man. They've been doing that for 1,000 years. They must have been doing that in Europe during the plagues and during, my God. And then she then comes back into a situation, and that then she's no longer Catholic, even though she took a vow to be a Catholic. And you saw that there was that the love affair superseded, the religion was trying to capture the love affair, was trying to define these kids with feelings, but you all saw that these kids were going to do what the hell they were going to do. And somehow she probably got along to become a Catholic, because Jesus is kind of, that kind of Italian Jesus is very sweetheart Jesus, with nice eyes and everything. You have a Catholicism from that kind of community that was naively beautiful in some way. I remember the girls that came from that community, and they were absolutely naively beautiful in some kind of weird way. And the Jesus story and the Mary story was kind of tattooed into the situation as being natural. Would you like the job, Catherine? You won't believe the job you've done.
No, I don't. I read
probably
my
would
own
demand more.
life as though it were somebody else's, you know.
Well, what do you think? Did it sound like you at all?
Oh, yeah, sure, sure.
Let's say the you that I visit a you in you, and then there's the literal you, obviously.
Mm.
What's the literal you again?
Danny, in India, I found that the indifference of India challenges one's humanity. I had a real inner conflict with embracing Vedanta and seeing the lack of humanity, you know.
Yeah.
And I chose humanity in the end, but did you find that at all when you were there?
You know, the funny thing is that the first time that I went there, I had met this guy who was visiting here, this guru, and he looked like a 1,000-year-old little guy that was teaching mantras. Then he had another big fellow who was his intermediary showing it. And it was a Central Park West, the hotel there, that we got a mantra for $10. And then somehow we connected very deeply where we took care of him. And we drove him cross country to Chicago and San Francisco and Los Angeles and back there to New York. And then they left. And we learned a series of mantras there, but there was an instant care for this fellow. And instantly we became vegetarian and all this. And there was no particular teaching. There were these mantras. So we did this naive thing. And then there was an agreement that we would meet him in his ashram in Rishikesh. So then I got a job for 10 weeks to get enough money to go there. And it was really weird because it was like these crooks who had a Venetian blind company and they were, and they wanted a salesperson to do that. But they also had kind of slave labor in there, dipping their arms in acid and stuff. And there was a girl I liked also who was doing that. So I was compromised. I said, just 10 weeks, I have to do this. So I got enough money for 10 weeks. And my friend also, we went then and we met in Bombay and we drove up together then to Rishikesh with the teacher. And we then went into that ashram. And it was really intense. It was a kind of hippie time and hip time also, where you threw yourself into it. So, but I had probably dysentery and all that. But I woke up one morning feeling that it was absolutely full of shit. And I couldn't even say what they were doing was full of shit. But even this song that I was just singing of mantras of Shiva coming down. And then when I went to the guru and said, I wanted to walk through India like he said that he had done, he then said that, do you have the $20 for the rent? So that was even worse than Brooklyn, okay. So I kind of left that place. But I can't say it was wrong. The mantras and everything was wrong, but I just felt full of shit. And it was in that kind of despair that set up a meeting with Doctor. And when I got to Doctor, there was a kind of despair. He was having an argument. It was so lame and so bourgeois after leaving all these mountain ashrams or whatever, and hip ashrams and seeing all of them. But he was breaking up with the family and even with his work. And something was happening for him, apparently. And so we met in that. And then some other folks came by and whatever, but you see, it was more of a hanging out circumstance while a process was unfolding, I think. So then when I did finally leave there, we had such conversations that when I got back to Brooklyn, with the house that I thought was my house and the relationship I thought was my relationship, life went on without me. I saw it came out of that conversation. The conversation manifested itself for me. There was no argument, no fight, no ownership, none of that. There was, but then that also kind of set up the stage where I met someone who was waiting for me, that she had seen me 3 years ago, and I just glanced at her, and all of a sudden that 3 years ago manifested. And she wanted me to help her because her husband divorced her in Israel, and she was subject to a get, which meant that she was not free to have a relationship or to remarry or anything like that. So then I went with her to this Hasidic Jewish community that is like that series Shtisel that you may see. And we were finding out what a get meant. And even with the Theosophical Society guys, they had the same kind of schmaltzy way of saying, look, the poor guy dreams of her. Can you, you know? And I said, well, you mean if he dreams of her, you know, look, he has to have 8 babies. Do you know how hard it is to have 8 babies and what these schmucks have to go through? So we're counseling them all the time. So they say, but can't we have a love affair? And it's just, love affair is an American idea of a love affair, you know. So they gave you their kind of biblical rationale as a reasoning, which was give the poor guy a break. He's a schmuck. He's to carry out God's rules. A person who would carry out God's rules has to be a schmuck. So we counsel him on his schmuckiness. He can't be too much of a schmuck. So then you ask, well, what would solve this question then? He said, you know, probably for $5,000, you can get, you can get her release, you know. So let's say you can negotiate with God also if you offer a little bit of money. But once you enter into their logic, you cannot say that it's, and then it's not only their logic, but it's Quranic. It's from the Torah, from the Bible, from the this, God says. What do you say? Does it appeal to you, Catherine?
No, I've heard that before. So
Would you like a God says circumstance for you? And they say, Catherine, God says.
I don't know who that fellow is, Danny.
Let's say that there is some element that's not fully you, but that has been the, let's say there's a device in some. Should we make up a schmaltzy story? Because I had to say this to someone who was having certain questions sexually and sensually, because you saw that somehow they were driven almost pure to find a love, that there was some schmucky element in them, that there was a love waiting for you. So you see the problem that schmo would have if he went into the stories purely and then the stories became literal. And he had to do this and do that while he still had this element, he or she still had this element of attraction to something that was purely abstract to the rest of the world. But that there was a date with a lover out there or a face in the crowd. So let's say you get a glimpse of your life almost as almost a purely creative act. And you see the literal world that forces you to suppress what would have been natural, but was surrendered towards the continuity, so that it was then in its suppression, it became distorted and hidden. That somehow the lovemaking had to be free, that somehow there was a dialogue. And so then you understood that while you were satisfying the literal, there was a sensual waiting in your mind's eye. Somehow you had elements of that in certain times in the relationship you were in, where the sensual and sexual were there in a baby. And so I have to say that Mary is the medium towards me getting the shot or literalizing the circumstance or whatever. But it's an agreement. Can't say it has perfection in it. We're subject to the schmuckiness of the situation, but one is attempted to navigate the story and keep the grace to some degree inherent in it. And that was not being heroic or being any element or whatever, but that somehow There was something in you that you then meet in yourself that was always caring for something. It was caring that it wasn't lost or distorted, or that it didn't sell out, that even in the creative world, the not wanting to sell out was even more manifest. So let's say that one gets a glimpse where one no longer owns it. And that's how it resembles a movie to me, is that you can't run up and change the storyline. So one gets a glimpse of the mystery inherent in their history. And you see that something to some degree, like Rocky Graziano, somebody up there likes me. We'll say, somebody up there surely liked you, Catherine. Hello.
Annie, you're a romantic at heart.
No, you got to do a.
You're a romantic at
You got to
heart.
do a namaste. Something you have to say. Something in there surely liked you. You don't think you've been looked out for? No, I'm not talking literally like an Italian
No,
prayer
no.
or something like that.
I felt that since I was 5 years old.
So you don't feel like you've had a conversation with some energy or something?
Since I was 5. Yeah, I always felt.
So it comes to you in certain ways. I've been just really re-exploring lucid dreaming again. You know, and the kinds of conversation that one then tries to comfort through the use of different drugs. You know, and because they kind of are made for. Once you see lucid dreaming. Now, physical lucid dreaming is sometimes to wake up in a dream and to be paralyzed. And so I've had that about 5 or 10 times as a kid growing up or whatever, where I couldn't call my mother in the other room. I could see her there, and I couldn't move at all, and I was scared, and I couldn't call out either. And then after finding out that there were friends that did have this dreaming interruptus, that most people are paralyzed in a dream when they're in the dream state. But there is a small population that act out and find themselves in the street or in a circumstance or whatever, because, but the ones that I would have is that you actually did wake up, but that your body was paralyzed, but you experienced what it meant. And it was very scary. But then there was a whole exploration of lucid dreaming as being, in fact, a parallel way of thinking. And that one was accessing it oftentimes in movie making and other, that there was what became a reality on the screen was actually a lucid reality that was composed. It wasn't a literal film of something literally as it was, but it was put together and made into a creation of a reality. And so a kind of lucid expression became part of the creative expression. So then there's a whole investigation. It wasn't their waking life was the one that they tried to show what people going through. But then when you see how many people were taking acid and to kind of explore other worlds, and those other worlds became sort of their realities. You understand that that's happening naturally anyway. So I say to get a glimpse of the life, and it's a glimpse, it's not talking one out of the dreads that may exist. But you also understand that one is kind of choosing the whole experience. Not to put a happy face on it, that happy doesn't mean happy face or dumbing down, but happy means the whole experience. And so I would say that in your empathy for what is happening, it then is happening to you. So when we see the young guy with the knee on his thing and the other guy not even glancing at him while he's doing it to him, you see what it means to be treated like shit. And they explain, well, you need to do that and you need to do that. And I say, yeah, they're probably right in what they're saying. But the thing is that the way you subdue someone is by treating them like a piece of shit. And so then you start, as we walk through the neighborhoods, we see, in perceiving it, there's an empathy that awakens.
Yeah.
So I guess we get to have the full experience.
Holy shit.
You get to, I think we have the, one, just sit there. What do you think? That's all you have to do is sit there with the virus and the shots and Netflix. Go to the balcony, look out the balcony, see what's going on. You can't go to the supermarket anymore. The dumbest supermarkets now are somebody pissed off or this or that. Now it doesn't have to be. It just seems to be part of a happening that we're stepping into, like a wind. What do you say, Catherine?
I didn't get that last part about why you can't go to supermarkets.
Oh, because there was another supermarket shooting yesterday at a Stop and Shop or
Oh,
something.
in Ohio, is that
No, the one in Long Island. There was one in
God, I can't keep up.
one in New York, upstate New York. There, but I think he was a fellow employee. He was a guy who got the wagons out in the supermarket. And maybe they said something to him or whatever, but he came in and killed 3 or shot 3 or something. And don't forget that Ursha had that down in her neighborhood. She had the boulder shootout. And then there was a photo of someone
I knew, yeah.
that she knew who was killed.
Yeah. Yeah, it comes home when that happens. A week ago, I had someone die. And suddenly it's not abstract anymore. It's real,
Yeah, I have that girl over there. That was my daughter. Can you see her? Yeah. So she died.
I know.
But she was strong. The boyfriend said that for 3 days he was begging her to go to the hospital or get a doctor, and she was toughing it out.
Yeah.
And then she had pneumonia with it.
My friend was 44 years old and very into alternative health. So she didn't go to a doctor. And suddenly when she did go, she had stage 4 cancer and operable. So she died. World-class violinist.
We're meeting doctors here who are going through it. One works in the emergency room and has his own thing with Mary. His wife worked with Mary in the store for a while, and they have 2 kids, and they're going, so they have to take trips to get away every now and then just to hang out in spaces, but they're also on call all the time. So we're seeing different variants of the same, but it also, even without the virus, we're seeing people find a way to find their own herd.
I really worry.
Much of the shootouts are arguments and broken relationships. So it seems that somehow the virus has great competition out there.
I worry about the young people, the teenagers. I see it in my grandson. They're depressed. They're angry. That's, and that's what happened yesterday. I guess that 16-year-old got killed. It's so sad. I think it's harder for that age group than any other. I really do.
What do you think, Kai? Somehow kept them cool.
Yeah, my kids are super cool.
Yeah. So somehow,
Are they teenagers?
Tico just turned 14 yesterday,
Oh my
Monday.
goodness. So you're in the
oh
soup.
boy, we should have sent them something. I would have sent them a guitar here.
Wow.
He flew an airplane again.
Hmm?
He flew an airplane again. He did that on his 12th birthday as well.
Okay, so, and since you used to be a teenager, Anthony, have anything to say? How does it look for you out there in the day to day?
Oh, going through the journey and realizing more as and seeing more as it unfolds.
Has it always been this way, Catherine?
Not like we're seeing today, I don't think.
You know, Catherine, when I was 13 or 14, I think that these Puerto Rican guys introduced heroin to kids.
Jeez.
We went into this luncheonette in the back, and this guy, should I mention his name? He may come from 100 years later. And I must have been 13 or 14, but then they forced a bar mitzvah on me too, whatever. I didn't even know I was Jewish that way. But then the butcher came to my mother. And since his son died, he wanted to provide a bar mitzvah for me. So then I was so embarrassed to go into this Jewish Hebrew school, but I was also using drugs as a little kid. And so what a weird scene. So, and I remember that he shot me in the arm, in the vein. And
When you were 14?
yeah,
you were-
then I crawled out of the restaurant, and I hated it, the feeling of it. But it still was in the neighborhood, and we started to, and a whole weird scene came out of that one act. So when you're talking about kids now, and then you also saw that there was 1,000 like you. Once you visited that world, just like now online, if you have a problem, you can go online and you see there's 2 million people, yet you can't meet anyone, but then you meet 2 million people out there with a similar question.
Yeah.
As soon as you're in that world becomes a reality. And you see that your neighbors are making money off of selling this, and that and it's natural in the situation, and there's a lifestyle around it. And then you're subject, even though you're still going to junior high school, you're not exactly normal. You're like a little crook or a little rat. And so rat things become normal. Except because you then find that you run into yourself. You can't join the pack. But you see, you get a kind of punishment. In retrospect, you see that even in your childhood, you ran into your human. But that human is a kind of failure in the literal experience. In other words, you may find in the Navy that you can't kill easily. And that makes you a schmuck. And there's a kind of punishment inherently in that, because you see America more from a moral principle than a literalness. It was more of a movie that you were in. When you meet the literalness of it, and you meet that other lives don't mean shit, and you go from cooperation to competition, then you run into a thread that runs into your life, whatever form it takes. And to some extent, you see that you were a failure in the story, but you understand that it was a failure because it needed a thread that ran through the story. Once the thread was real, the story was real. But somehow you couldn't do 12 years a slave easily. And somehow the environment you're in would start to change once the feeling left. Now then you start to be aware creatively of lag time, where there is something that reaches you so deeply. There are some times when it reaches you so deeply that there's an instant shift even in your body that accommodates it. And that may be happening even when you see that you're taking something that has too much sugar in it or something, and you've been taking it normally, and then you discover what they put inside of it, and it instantly falls away. But in the larger picture, you see that how deeply the threads run through it, where the story of one's life is not a possessive, but the survival has possessive elements in it. But then to see the photo album of one's life is where it's no longer one's life. You see the elements that have run through it, and there's aha moments that allow you to some degree to experience the life you've lived, but only from a kind of dormant place in yourself. It has to be, the perception of it activates a dormant aspect, I feel, where one has a kind of feeling for the life that they've lived. And that means one awakens the other dimensions of friendships and situations that you're in. And you see that it was a cooperative to some degree. And kind of composed of accidents. Would you say? So unless, Ursula, you accidentally got the virus. You didn't have an affair with the janitor guy.
No.
Even though, no. You didn't hug someone knowing that they had the virus. So all you had to do was sit there.
No, I was kind of careful when I went out. I mean,
Okay. Is this too woozy a sound there, Catherine? Or what do you say? You know, since you were wearing
I'm feeling such anger toward that idiot who shot up a 14-year-old. I'm just feeling. So that's one thing. The other, this quote from Ramakrishna kept coming up. Receive as many blows as you possibly can from the world. Only then will your heart turn upward. I don't know if
You know, if in fact you want to see how one survives in Hollywood, there's a good book out called Spite.
It's spite.
Spite.
Yeah.
And it's the usage of spite. And if in fact you start to see how much spite has organized the place, but then when they started to test people on spite, will say, if your husband broke up with you and then says, okay, he's going to take 70% and he's going to give you 30%. And you say, keep the 30%. I'll take no. So the person who would lose 30% to say, take nothing is trying to use spite, okay, as a medium. And so you see that they would give up logic for spite. And the spite didn't have to reach such huge proportions. It was kind of almost in every little act. No, you take it. I don't want it then. And supposedly the person was giving up their rights in order to have an effect in the situation. But he was very clever how far he went with it, because he saw that the spite was part of the human characteristic. They didn't have to, there was exceptional spite that rearranged the situation creatively. And then there was ineffectual spite that was sent messages of hurt or whatever. But how deeply spite as a language that everyone intuited when it happened to them, even if they couldn't explain it. And so that's, even the rabbi couldn't explain it to me around then. He says, okay, but when you're talking about the guy who won't release his wife from the marriage after he's remarried himself, aren't we talking about spite? Aren't we talking about trying to hurt, send a message to the other person that the other person will become aware of, but if they try to explain it, they'll sound crazy. That somehow the person is in your dream, or somehow the person is doing. And so then they say the whole, so it was very interesting to read today, the review of the book. I think it was in the New York Times today, and it was the book Spite, but then the variance of it, the creative use of it, the hurtful use of it, but how it ran through the system and how people let each other know when they were pissed off with them in subtle ways that couldn't be proven easily.
It's not so subtle today. A young girl with a butcher knife got herself killed.
I saw that. I've
That's
been
fine.
also aware of this, watching it unfold, all of it, and seeing the shots of it and the films and the throwbacks to it. But I also say that your perspective on it is given from the situation that you're in. It has always been to some degree. That's why I raised the question at 13 or 14. Schmooky little dopey kids that we were, all of a sudden followed older kids who got us into trouble. And then the trouble was, but we remained schmucky kids even as we were getting into trouble. So we weren't clever enough even to avoid the trouble or getting this or that. We weren't really this or that. We went into a situation that was normalized.
Danny, I can't even imagine. At that age, all I could think about was horses.
Well, that can also be really dumb. I think I went into
That was my world at 14. Yeah.
Oh,
well, I think that if I'm flying back over situations, it's very weird, isn't it? What do you say, Kai? If you fly back over your life and you get into situations as if you were a camera in the room, and you say, how the hell was I got involved in such a weird scene like that? And you say, how did I let that older kid, Tommy, take me into the Jeanette room there and try this thing? And then I didn't even like it, you know. And even with smoking, I didn't even like it, and yet we smoked, you know.
Mhm.
And so what do you think? Is it weird, Catherine?
It's what weird looking back.
No, that you got punished for being human, for being a schmuck, for helping others or something like that. Or
Well, I didn't really get punished for helping others. No, my original question was, did you feel in India that the indifference of India to people who were sick or dying or whatever seemed not inhuman to me? So I felt, must I sacrifice humanity to get the truth? You know, that was my kind of inner
I think the
conflict.
way, once there was an interest deeply, it was like marrying someone in that place. Somehow you assume the cultural logic, like my mother will say, she became a Catholic, but she couldn't eat ham in herself. She made ham for them, but somehow she couldn't. So they would laugh at her. So she was, in a situation, you understand, where her love for this kid allowed her into this story. And somehow the story which her family resisted was logical for her while she was in it, as long as she had a kind of pure love with this guy.
Well, that's what
By the
women
way,
do.
then the situation literalized. And they still loved her. But from what I remember now, in retrospect, she was called a Butana Diable. They all loved her. The different Catholics and they all loved her, but she was I guess that would manifest as a devil whore who got one of their religious boys or something like that. And then my brother was he was of two faiths, okay, and so, but that was happening all the time between people, kind of intermarriage. But then you saw in the tribe, there was a name given to the person who was not of the tribe, who came into the tribe, where they fell in love. And they would teach you to be aware of those kind of women, those kind of guys, because they took you out of the tribal situation that you were in. You understand? And we were schmoes like that, So
Well, didn't-
basically, you can see a thread of that somehow. Something allowed you to actually go through the mirror and come out into a whole other culture and normalize it. You know, and they say, well, how are you? And so let's say if I saw you then, I would laugh my culo off at you. I say, look
Yeah.
at Catherine. She was in that role.
Sorry, being the wife of a Brahmin.
No,
Another life.
No, you did Judy Garland as if you were Judy Garland who did the wife of a Brahmin.
Playing a
Or Susan,
role.
Susan Hayward. Let's say Susan
It's a
Hayward.
role. It's another role.
So let's say it's a Susan Hayward role that you assumed. You did Susan Hayward. Remember she went to the Congo or something?
No,
Yeah.
Jennifer Jones. I think I'd rather
Oh
think of
boy,
Jennifer
that's
Jones.
okay. I like her a lot, Jennifer Jones. You
Hey,
think-
Danny?
Hmm?
I need to head out, but it was nice seeing everyone.
Sorry, I'm
Thank
sorry.
I have
I'm so
to go
goofy
too.
you.
today.
We'll
Sorry,
talk.
I'm so goofy today. Oftentimes it's very meaningful.
Thank you, though. It was lovely. See you
Take
guys.
care of yourself. I'll see
Bye.
you anytime.
Penny, I have to go too, but
Okay.
namaste. Thank you.
Take care.
I was ill last week. That's why I haven't tuned in.
Okay, sometimes your absence has a force.
I doubt that, but anyway,
No, your absence has a force there.
well, good seeing you.
It's a crazy quilt. We're creating a crazy quilt of an experience here, you know.
I was thinking today, do you remember when I was rear-ended in Hollywood? And I
Yeah.
think you picked me up and took me because my car was totaled. I was thinking that when I was looking at you. That was
Aw.
another life.
Yes, it was.
Anyway,
See you
good
later.
seeing you. Bye.
Has anyone else been on, Kai?
We have some people on YouTube. Will was working, but he was watching. Angelo, Magic Sufi.
My father's name, they changed to Angelo or
Oh.
Angel. But then when Mary visited the grave, my father, there was a symbol of two hands touching in the Dr. Spock.
Mm-hmm.
And then Angelo was angel. It actually meant angel. And the name, I guess the family name was Sabatai, which means angel.
Oh.
But when they came to America, they probably gave him the name Angelo
Oh.
because of that, because they couldn't interpret it themselves or whatever. So then he became Angelo Castro. But then when I saw the two hands together like that on the gravestone there, and it was like a Sufi connection or something like that with that.
Where did he come from?
You know, I guess they had no country. But I think he was born in Turkey. And ironically, Nathaniel calls me every week from the same town. Now it's a Greek town,
Oh.
Salonika. And it was where this kind of Messiah from the 16th century settled there too. But I think that just people were just traveling and fleeing and living in different countries there. So they came out of Turkey. But to come to America, you had to come through Naples, Italy. So many people thought they were Italian. You had to pretend to be Italian in order to get a passport to get out of there. I guess it must have been hell for people coming to America. You know, why they would come across the world like that, it must have been hell where they were.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so I still didn't get completely what the history is. You know, I think, and
Was he young? Was he pretty young when he came?
I don't know. You know, literally what the history. I think that he left. His father died young when he was 5 or so, I heard, and then his mother went to Palestine in 1912 when he was 10 years old. Must have left him an orphan.
Oh, wow.
And so then I do have some, you know, papers of his and writings or whatever that they went to France. Or maybe they were born in France and they went to Turkey, you know. So they were just people without a country. And then he started to learn art, supposedly, because when he came to the States, he was working in the Art Students League, but they all must have been broke and strung out. And they were doing this kind of socialist artwork of Diego Rivera, all the movements that were going on so there were movements that were going on. And I think that after my mother's husband died, the Catholic boy, then she was considered an outcast. So they probably got my father, probably needed a green card or something. So it must be a world like that, where then they got married in order to, because she was considered an outcast in both the religions. And so that made her pure again. And I think from what I've heard, she and her 3 sisters were always looking for boyfriends, for her or whatever. Wow. So they probably had to save her life and the family or this or that. So it's all weird stuff. But again, if your kids reviewed your life story, actually, or stumbled upon it, there's a kind of holy shitness hidden inside everyone's life story that is normal. So you think this is the normal person that you see before you. But then you see a story unfold. And that somehow we navigated a weird story. Yeah. Where you saw that the experience that some kids were born free, that were born without a historical mandate. And that you didn't come from a history, but you were free to find your voice. And you see then it's a journey of finding your voice. And it took you through the weirdest places and the most contradictory places. That reason wasn't the dominant force. So I say, when you have a perspective on the life, not from the literalness of it, the survival gene, but you see that inherently beyond the literal story, there's an evocative story that resembles more of a movie where time is compressed, where you can fly back 50 years or 50 seconds with the same mechanism. And we're now having a virus out there that supposedly has interrupted the literal time and space, where one is almost creating a day or a year. And it's probably the virus has probably allowed a situation to be that may have been very explosive.
Right.
You know what I mean? But somehow the virus allowed us to hang out. Okay. Is that okay? You okay, Urja?
Yes, I'm a little concerned. My daughter is traveling to Spain with a friend. And when she called me this morning, she was in France, but they choose places where there's not too much shaking people, because she was not vaccinated and her friend was not vaccinated either. Yeah. So I'm a little concerned.
Don't they have to, if they're traveling, don't they have to show proof now in Europe?
Well, they said they passed, they took country roads and they went through.
I guess if you're going to use the society, then you kind of have to go along with it. If in fact you've created a circumstance creatively for yourself, you're free to relate to it. But basically, if you're going to interact, you have to consider it. I don't know. It's I feel that once we come to a space in conversation where there's an inherent sanity, then the doing or don't is not that big a deal. It is more when it speaks or creatively touches you, or because you're operating in that field. But again, when in fact you are caring for something, essentially, then the caring for you allows you to see something outside of yourself. There is a commonality if you all get on a train together.
Yeah.
Of respect for each other and situation that's inherently in the form. and you can see when it's violating. But generally, people will say, excuse me, or hi, or get out of the way of the other, or maybe even engage in conversations. So in that dialogue, then it seems to me you're caring for the humanity of a circumstance. So then I think then the question is more coming from a human space. Now I say your immune system may still yell at you, so you may have to ask your immune system as to what's happening, and maybe even the test today or the other day will give you some sense of where you're at, some measure of where you're at in time, you know. But I think that you're taking care of yourself, and then taking care of yourself, it's meaning like you're caring for the atmosphere that you're in.
Mhm.
So the question is how it comes to you, not the do or don't.
Yeah.
If it
I-
violates
Anything.
deeply, I'm still sniffing this parasympathetic smell.
Yeah, I think that made me a little bottle.
But I would still get these,
Danny,
you know, these ones that they sell, the neti sticks. I think they're $4 or so, but these are pretty good. But you do want to know that your sense of smell is there.
with the parasympathetic oil, you're supposed to put it behind your ear.
That's what she said. But then there was also a nice article that says, don't put the oils on your skin.
Well, I did, and I didn't put. I put a little bit. It didn't do anything.
Well, they say don't use the oils for your face or your, unless it's olive oil or something like that. They were suggesting, but they was suggesting that those concentrated oils can throw you for a loop.
Yes.
So then but I did find a burning sensation in my eye and in my nose one time when I did have it on my face, another one.
Yes.
So then what I'm doing is, but I'm working now more with the seeing, smelling, and hearing outdoors with the clubs and exercises like that. And I'm really, I'll try to make a video of shadows, you know, the sunshine against the wall, because then it's shadow bars. But it was quite beautiful. But then I see that there are people online that are pretty good with it. But I'm using it more in our way, you know, where it's more Jivan Tattva exercises or Feldenkrais movements. And I'm using some of the things we used to do with the eyes in India also on the balcony when we did the Bates eye method out there of freeing the eye and just letting it roam. But then I'm coordinating it with smelling and hearing, you know. So I'm just kind of reawakening the senses again like that. And I'm also seeing it mathematically and from different places or whatever. And I may walk around the grounds also doing the exercises, but just walking around. So I'm doing like that, kind of naturalizing the processes again. So the first shot of this has been okay so far, and nothing, you don't even notice it.
Wow, I had the
I did put off this doctor test that I supposedly until next month or so, because I think next week we're scheduled to get the second shot.
Mm-hmm.
Next Tuesday. And we'll see.
Oh, you have 2 shots, so it's Moderna. No?
Pfizer.
Oh, it's also 2 shot Pfizer? I didn't know.
I think they're talking about every year. Look, I was just 81 years old. Time is such a weird factor. I can do all this, still move around as if it doesn't matter at all. But I can also just fall in the toilet bowl and just die too. But I still feel that the dying would be my letting go, and not so much that even if I fell down, it would be a joke. You would see it was a joke. So I am kind of having a conversation with dying. And so the virus is part of the goof. So it is, I'm going along with the story that I'm in. So I have to say, it's Mary's love and concern that allows me to do such a weird thing.
I believe that.
All of you may use logic or French or whatever the hell you use.
Right.
But I had to be schmucky enough where someone says, "Hey, baby, come on, I set it up for you. Let's do it." And they're smiling at you and this and that.
Yes.
So then I say, "Okay, what the hell? The shit that I've done to myself, are you kidding?" And I didn't die with all the stuff that I've done to myself and what I did. Okay. So it's a small potatoes thing, but somehow it had to have a "hey baby" in it.
Yeah. Yes.
And somehow it had to be something of an agreement in our circumstance that allowed Janet then to be free to see what you like to do.
Yes.
And so there's some degree, Mary and Brenda are meeting the public and going out there, so they may have to be fair to the public that they're meeting with the people.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
So in that, I allow myself some of the goofiness, but then I do say the duality of it, where my immune system gets pissed off because it's not me doing it; it's my immune system that's going to have to work with it. So I'm not talking about a literal immune. I'm
You'll
talking
get
about
over it.
immune system almost being like the soul of the story. You become aware that something has been managing your life all along. Where you kind of then apologize to the body and say, "I'm sorry, baby, for laying this on you," okay.
Yes.
So then it becomes more where there's not a difference. Your body and you are you. And you see that there's a cooperation taking place.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so then you see that your daughter has also the same elements that you have of not getting the virus, like I and us, and then or the vaccination or the virus,
Right.
and how complex they're going to move through the whole system in order not to do something. But that's also how people ran away to avoid fascists and stuff like that, and they had to make up their names and do all this stuff. And so I feel that there's always been a kind of parallel existence of people who were in it but not of it. And because they were not of it, they always had to make believe or lie, and they couldn't lie too much, but they had to kind of make believe a story of themselves in order to navigate the life. Yeah. And so they kind of meant more theater of life, where somehow it was a journey. And we perceive it as a journey. So you see that your daughter's doing exactly what you did.
Oh, yes.
And that you trained her well.
Oh, boy. Yes. I
And you
did.
say, "What do you do for a living?" I say, "Well, I give readings." I say, "What does she do for a living?" And she says, "With those, what is it again?"
Teaches the self-care, sensuality, essentially. How to take care of oneself sensually.
Right. And you see then once you get in, so then that's why I was kidding around in the beginning of the show. You see that Freud was using cocaine all the time. And that Jung, and I don't know if you offer Jesus a joint, you say, "Here's a joint. It'll lighten up the pain a little bit." Whether he would have said no or yes, or he would have said thanks a lot or whatever, So my feeling is that we're human beings. And we're just people. And just being people consciously to some degree is the genuine spiritual journey. Because inherently in just being people and keeping it together, you saw a remarkable creative act. And that one was not only surviving literally, but they were keeping their humanity alive. The capacity to love or to feel or to share. So I feel that we have stumbled upon where our different lives resemble, there's a resemblance running, there's a thread running through the story. And that we share something to some degree where we take a bit of it into our literal lives. Where it's there's a difference between being a religious being and having an organized religion.
Right.
Usually a religious being can't be captured into a book of rules. It still has to be a kind of intuitive human feeling that guides you through the story. So when you experience a violation of that human experience, there's something in you that resists. And in that resistance, it may be punished. But somehow the person who's creatively involved cannot go along with the false to that degree when there's inherent balance. Oh, we just lost Urja.
Wait, it's I forgot to put the wire.
Okay. But we'll say goodbye. Bye-bye, everyone. And I'll hope to see you maybe
Thank
tomorrow.
you, Danny.
Bye-bye.